In the frozen mountains of Montana Territory, a 15-year-old orphan boy stumbled upon an Apache woman abandoned in the wilderness, her body racked with labor pains miles from any settlement. With nothing but his bare hands and a will stronger than fear, he fought off wolves in the darkness, carried her through a blizzard, and delivered her baby in a snow-buried cave, never knowing that the woman he saved was the wife of Chief Dakota, one of the most powerful Apache leaders in the territory. And his act of courage was about to bridge two worlds that had been at war for generations. The Montana Territory in the winter of 1878 was not a place for the weak. It was a land where the cold didn't just bite, it devoured. Where the wind howled through the pine forests like the voices of angry spirits, and where the snow fell so thick and relentless that it erased trails, landmarks, and hope itself. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against a steel-gray sky, their peaks hidden in clouds that promised more storms, more suffering, more death. In the shadow of those mountains, tucked into a narrow valley where the Clark Fork River carved its way through stone and ice, sat the town of Ember Ridge. It wasn't much of a town, really. Just a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a single muddy street that turned to frozen ruts come winter. A general store with a sagging roof and windows so caked with grime you couldn't see inside. A blacksmith's forge that glowed red in the twilight, sending sparks dancing into the bitter air. A saloon called the Frozen Nickel, where miners and trappers drank away their loneliness with rot-gut whiskey that burned going down and left you emptier than before. A boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Kettering, who charged too much and asked too few questions. Her face as hard and cracked as the land itself. Most people came to Ember Ridge for one reason: the silver mines up in the hills. They came chasing fortune, chasing dreams, chasing anything that might pull them out of whatever hole they'd crawled from back east. Men with desperate eyes and calloused hands. Women who'd left everything behind for promises that rarely came true. Some struck it rich, finding veins of silver that glittered like frozen starlight. Most didn't. And those who stayed too long found that the mountains had a way of keeping you, of grinding you down until you were just another frozen body waiting for the spring thaw. Just another name carved into a wooden cross that the wind would eventually knock over and bury. The town had its hierarchy, its invisible lines that everyone understood. The mine owners at the top, men in fine coats who never got dirt under their fingernails. The foremen and the skilled workers next, the ones who knew how to read a vein or operate the stamp mills. Then the day laborers, the drifters, the Chinese workers who lived in their own separate camp and weren't allowed in the saloon. And at the very bottom, lower than everyone, were the strays, the orphans, the ones who belonged to nobody and nothing. Finn Holloway didn't come to Ember Ridge by choice. He'd been born there, or near enough, in a one-room shack 2 miles outside town where the wind came through gaps in the walls, like cold fingers searching for warmth. His mother had been a washerwoman named Mary Holloway, a thin, tired woman with auburn hair that had started going gray before she turned 30. She'd followed a miner named Jack Holloway west from Ohio with promises of a better life. Promises of a home and security, and maybe even happiness. Jack Holloway was a dreamer. The kind of man who always believed the next shaft would be the one. The next claim would make them rich. He worked the mines from dawn until dark, coming home covered in rock dust and silver ore that never amounted to anything. Finn barely remembered him. Just flashes, really. The smell of tobacco and sweat. Rough hands lifting him up. A deep voice singing some half-remembered song from the old country. The mine collapse that killed Jack happened on a Tuesday in March. Finn was 3 years old. They never recovered the body. The tunnel had caved in completely, burying Jack and 4 other men under tons of rock and darkness. The mine company paid Mary $15, the standard widow's compensation, and told her she had a week to clear out of company housing. Mary did what she could. She took in washing, scrubbing other people's clothes until her hands bled, hanging laundry on lines that froze solid in winter. She sewed and mended. She cleaned houses for the mine owners' wives, women who looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. Finn remembered those years in fragments. His mother's cough, wet and rattling, that started the winter he turned 6 and never went away. The way she'd smile at him even when her eyes were hollow with exhaustion. The stories she'd tell him at night about his father, making Jack Holloway sound like a hero instead of just another man the mountains had swallowed. The consumption took her slow. It started with the cough, then the weight loss, then the blood. By the time Finn was 8, Mary Holloway weighed less than 90 pounds, her body wasted to nothing, her lungs filling with fluid no doctor could drain. She died on a cold morning in November, holding Finn's hand, trying to say something he couldn't understand through the blood in her throat. The undertaker, a man named Greaves with breath that smelled like pickled eggs, buried her in an unmarked grave on the hillside where the town dumped its poor. No service, no prayers, no one to remember Mary Holloway except a boy who suddenly belonged to no one at 8 years old. Finn became what the town called a stray. No family, no home, no name that mattered to anyone except the undertaker who'd charged $3 for the burial. Money the church had to pay because Finn had nothing. He survived the way stray dogs survived, by being invisible, by taking what scraps he could find, by learning which alleys were safe and which weren't, by never staying in one place long enough for someone to decide he was a problem worth solving. The first winter nearly killed him. He didn't know about finding shelter, about layering clothes, about keeping his extremities dry. He learned by nearly losing his toes to frostbite, by waking up so cold he couldn't feel his fingers, by watching other strays die in their sleep and understanding that the margin between living and dying was thinner than a knife blade. He slept wherever he could. In the summer, behind the blacksmith's forge, where the stone still held warmth hours after the fire died. In the winter, in the crawl space beneath Mrs. Kettering's boarding house where the cold couldn't quite reach him, where he could hear the footsteps of paying customers above and imagine what it felt like to have a real bed, real blankets, real warmth. He ate what people threw away, what he could steal without getting caught. What the Chinese cook at the saloon, a man named Chun who never smiled but always left a tin pail of scraps by the back door on Thursdays. The town tolerated him because he stayed invisible. Sheriff Bridger, a massive man with a beard like steel wool, had told him once when he was 9, "Stay out of trouble, boy. Don't steal where people can see you. Don't make me have to notice you." It was the closest thing to kindness the law ever showed him by the time Finn turned 15. He'd grown tall and lean, all sinew and bone, standing just over 6 feet with shoulders that were starting to broaden from hard work. His hair was dark brown, shaggy and unkempt, falling past his ears because he cut it himself with a knife when it got too long. His eyes were the color of slate, gray-blue and watchful, always scanning, always calculating distances and exits and threats. His face was weathered beyond his years, carved by wind and hunger into something older, harder, with a jaw that hadn't quite finished forming and cheekbones that stood out sharp beneath sun-darkened skin. His clothes were a patchwork of things he'd scavenged or traded for. A wool coat 3 sizes too big that had belonged to a trapper who'd frozen to death up in the high country. The sleeves rolled back so Finn's hands could reach through. Boots held together with wire and hope. The soles worn so thin he could feel every rock through them. Pants that had belonged to 3 different people before him, patched with squares of different fabric until they looked like a quilt. A shirt that might have been red once but had faded to the color of old blood. Gloves with holes in the fingertips. A hat with a brim that drooped on one side. But Finn had something most strays didn't. He had skills. Real skills that people valued. He could track animals through snow so deep it buried fences. reading the subtle disturbances that revealed where a rabbit had passed or a deer had bedded down. He could start a fire with damp wood and flint, coaxing flame from materials that looked impossible. He could skin a rabbit in under a minute and stretch the hide properly so it would fetch top price from the tanner. He knew which plants were safe to eat and which would kill you, which mushrooms could be boiled into soup, and which would have you hallucinating before you died. He knew how to read the sky, how to smell a storm coming hours before it arrived, how to find water even when the creeks were frozen solid. The trappers in town noticed. Men like Silas Cormac, a one-eyed Scotsman who'd lost his left eye to a bear 20 years ago, and wore a leather patch that made him look like a pirate. Men like Dutch Vandermeer, who spoke with a thick accent and could track anything that walked on four legs. They started hiring Finn for day work, paying him in coins or dried meat, or sometimes just a place to sleep for a night in a lean-to that smelled like animal fat and tobacco. Finn would haul their pelts down from the high country, beaver and mink and fox and the occasional wolf. He'd reset their traps, the steel jaws hungry for whatever stepped wrong. He'd gut their kills, his hands moving with practiced efficiency, separating hide from flesh, saving the good meat, and tossing the rest for scavengers. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was survival. And survival was all Finn knew, all he'd ever known, all he figured he'd ever need. He'd learned early that hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. Hope made you weak. Hope made you believe things could be different. And when they inevitably weren't, hope left you more broken than before. So Finn lived day to day, breath to breath, never planning more than a week ahead, because planning required believing you'd still be alive. Still be here, still matter, on a gray morning in late November, when the first heavy snows had already buried the valley under 3 feet of white and the temperature had dropped so low that spit froze before it hit the ground. Finn was walking the trapline for Silas Cormac. The old Scotsman had paid him 2 days in advance. A rare show of trust, $1 in coin and a pouch of dried venison that would last a week if Finn rationed it right. The trapline ran 8 miles through dense forest, up into the foothills where the pine trees grew so close together, the sunlight barely reached the ground even at noon. It was dangerous country. Wolves hunted there. Mountain cats. Bears that should have been hibernating but sometimes weren't. And the cold, always the cold. Waiting to catch you if you slipped, if you fell. If you stopped moving for too long. Finn had checked 6 traps already. 2 were empty, their triggers untouched, their bait frozen solid. 3 had frozen rabbits, their bodies stiff as boards, eyes glazed with ice. 1 had been torn apart by something big, the trap sprung and bent, drag marks in the snow leading off into the trees. Probably a wolf or a mountain cat, something strong enough to rip through steel. Finn reset what he could, collected the frozen rabbits and stuffed them in the canvas sack slung over his shoulder, and kept moving, his breath plumed white in the air, hanging like ghost smoke before the wind tore it away. His fingers ached inside his thin gloves, the kind of ache that went bone deep and made you worry about frostbite. The cold was the kind that made your bones feel brittle, like they might snap if you moved wrong. Like you were made of ice instead of flesh. He was a mile from the last trap, moving through a section of forest where the snow had drifted higher than his waist. When he heard it, a sound, faint, almost swallowed by the wind that moaned through the pines. Finn stopped, head tilted, listening. Years of surviving alone had taught him to trust his instincts, to pay attention to sounds that didn't belong. There it was again. A cry, human, female, and it was filled with pain. His first instinct was to ignore it. People who wandered into these woods alone usually had good reasons to be running from something, and getting involved in other people's trouble was a fast way to end up dead. The wilderness didn't care about your good intentions. It would kill you for being stupid just as fast as it would kill you for being unlucky. But something in the sound, Something raw and desperate and utterly helpless pulled at him. It reminded him of his mother in those final days, the sounds she'd made when the pain got too bad and there was nothing anyone could do. And despite everything Finn had learned about staying invisible, about not caring, about surviving by keeping his head down, he couldn't ignore it. He turned off the trail, pushing through waist-deep snow, following the cry like a thread pulling him forward. The forest thickened. Branches clawed at his coat, catching and tearing. His boots punched through ice-crusted drifts, each step an effort that burned his legs. Sweat ran down his back despite the cold, freezing against his skin. And then he saw her, a woman, collapsed against the base of a massive pine tree whose trunk was wider than 3 men standing side by side. She was small, maybe in her early 20s, with long black hair tangled with snow and pine needles that stuck to her face like a veil. Her clothes were unlike anything Finn had seen in Ember Ridge, a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns of red and blue and white. A heavy buffalo hide cloak wrapped around her shoulders, moccasins lined with fur that came up past her ankles. Her face was contorted in pain, her hands clutching her swollen belly, her breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps that sent white clouds into the frozen air. She was Apache. Finn knew that much. He'd seen Apache traders come through town before, though they kept their distance from the white settlers and the miners kept their distance from them. The tensions between the tribes and the miners ran deep, old blood soaking into older ground. Stories of raids and counter-raids, of treaties made and broken, of land stolen and lives lost on both sides. The woman's eyes snapped open when she heard him approach, crunching through the snow. They were dark, fierce, filled with pain and something else, defiance. She said something in a language Finn didn't understand, her voice sharp despite her condition. Words that sounded like a challenge or a warning. Finn held up his hands, palms out, showing he wasn't armed, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the wind. She said something else, urgent, desperate, her hand moving instinctively to a knife at her belt, a blade with an antler handle worn smooth from use. But before she could draw it, another contraction hit and she doubled over, gasping, her whole body seizing. Her face twisted, every muscle straining, and a low moan escaped her throat that sounded more animal than human. Finn's mind raced. She was in labor, alone, in the middle of nowhere. And from the way her body was shaking, from the way her breathing had turned shallow and ragged, from the blue tinge to her lips despite the buffalo cloak, she didn't have much time. She was hypothermic, exhausted, and the baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not. He knelt in the snow a few feet away, speaking slowly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I'm going to help you. Understand? Help." He pointed to her, then to himself, then made a cradling motion with his arms, rocking them like he was holding a baby. Her eyes locked onto his, searching for something. Truth maybe. Or just the absence of a threat. Or maybe she was just too far gone to care anymore, too broken by pain and cold to do anything but accept whatever came next. Whatever she saw in Finn's face, it was enough. She nodded once barely, and her hand fell away from the knife. Finn moved closer, assessing the situation with the same practical efficiency he used when dressing a deer. She was hypothermic, her lips tinged blue, her body trembling violently with shivers she couldn't control. The baby was coming, that much was obvious from the way her belly contracted, hard and rhythmic. And the nearest town, the nearest doctor, was 8 miles away through snow and forest that would kill them both before they made it halfway. He looked around, his eyes scanning for options. They needed shelter. His gaze landed on an outcropping of rocks about 50 yards uphill, a natural overhang that formed a shallow cave, its opening partially hidden by snow-laden branches. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Better than staying out here in the open where the wind could reach them. "Can you walk?" he asked, miming the motion. Taking a few steps and pointing at her feet, she shook her head, her face twisting with another wave of pain that made her cry out. A sound that echoed off the trees and sent a pair of ravens scattering into the gray sky. Finn didn't hesitate. He couldn't afford to. Every second they stayed out here was another second closer to death. He shrugged off his coat, the cold immediately biting through his shirt, and wrapped it around her shoulders over the buffalo cloak, tucking it tight. Then he slid his arms beneath her, one under her knees, one behind her back, and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, all muscle and bone. But the effort still made his legs burn, made his back scream in protest. He staggered forward through the snow, each step sinking deep, each breath tearing through his lungs like broken glass. The woman cried out, her body convulsing against him, her hands gripping his shirt so tight he could feel her fingernails through the fabric. Finn gritted his teeth and kept moving. One step, then another. The outcropping seemed impossibly far away, like something in a dream that kept receding no matter how far you walked. His legs trembled. His vision blurred with the effort. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant dying, and Finn Holloway had survived too much. Fought too hard, to die now, when he finally reached the outcropping. When he finally staggered into the shallow cave beneath the rock overhang. He lowered her gently onto a bed of pine needles and dried leaves that the wind had blown there. The space was small, barely enough for two people, but it blocked the wind, and that was everything. The temperature inside was maybe 10 degrees warmer than outside, which might be the difference between life and death. The woman was making sounds now, low and guttural. Primal sounds that came from somewhere deep and instinctive. Her body was arching, her hands clawing at the ground. Finn had seen animals give birth before, deer and rabbits, and once a horse. But this was different. This was a human being in agony, and he had no idea what to do beyond the basics he'd learned watching nature take its brutal course. He immediately started gathering firewood, moving fast, breaking dead branches from nearby trees, scraping together anything dry enough to burn. He found a fallen log half buried in snow and kicked it apart, saving the driest pieces. He scraped away snow with his hands until he found bare ground. Piling rocks in a circle to contain the fire, he had flint and steel in his pocket. A gift from Silas, who told him once that fire was the difference between living and dying in these mountains. His hands shook, whether from cold or fear he didn't know, as he struck them together. Once, twice, 3 times. A spark caught on the dried moss he'd stuffed between the kindling. He blew gently, coaxing the ember into flame, feeding it carefully. The fire grew, small but fierce, pushing back the cold, casting dancing shadows on the rock walls. The woman was watching him now through half-closed eyes, her breathing ragged and uneven. She said something in Apache, words he couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear enough. Hurry. And that's when Finn heard it. A sound that made his blood run cold. A howl. Low and long, echoing through the trees, carried on the wind like a promise of death. Wolves. The howl came again, closer this time, and it wasn't alone. 3 distinct voices rose through the darkness, weaving together in a chorus that spoke of hunger and pack coordination. Finn grabbed a burning branch from the fire, the flames crackling and spitting sparks into the cold air, and positioned himself at the mouth of the cave, his body blocking the entrance. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack them. Behind him, Nalin cried out again, her voice breaking with pain and exhaustion. The contractions were coming faster now, her body beyond her control, driven by something ancient and unstoppable. Finn could hear her breathing, sharp and desperate, punctuated by sounds that made his stomach twist with helplessness. The wolves appeared like ghosts materializing from the snow-laden darkness. First 1, then 2, then 3, their eyes catching the firelight and reflecting it back in shades of amber and green. They were massive, winter-starved, and desperate, their ribs showing through matted gray fur, their muzzles scarred from fights and hunts. The largest one, a male with a notched ear and a coat the color of smoke, stood at the front, his lips pulled back to reveal teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. Finn had encountered wolves before, had learned their patterns from the trappers who respected them and feared them in equal measure. A healthy wolf would usually avoid humans, would circle and watch but rarely attack unless cornered or protecting a kill. But these weren't healthy wolves. These were starving wolves in the dead of winter. And a starving wolf would attack anything that smelled like meat, would take any risk for a chance at survival. The smoke-colored leader took a step forward, testing, his head low and his shoulders hunched. Finn thrust the burning branch toward him, shouting loud and aggressive, making himself as big and threatening as possible. The wolf stopped, eyes narrowing, but he didn't retreat. Behind him, the other two began to fan out, one moving left, one moving right. Pack tactics designed to flank and overwhelm. Finn's mind raced through his options. The cave entrance was narrow enough that only one wolf could come at him at a time, which was good. The fire was small but growing, which meant he had more branches to use as torches. His knife was in his boot, a 4-inch blade that Silas had given him, sharp enough to skin a rabbit, but laughably inadequate against 3 full-grown wolves. If they rushed him together, if they coordinated their attack, he was dead. And so was Nalin. And so was her baby. The thought crystallized something in Finn's chest, something hard and immovable. He'd spent his whole life invisible, had survived by staying small and quiet and out of the way. But not tonight. Tonight he was all that stood between life and death for 2 people who couldn't defend themselves. Tonight he mattered. Tonight he would be seen. The wolf on the left moved first, darting in low and fast, jaws snapping at Finn's leg. Finn pivoted and brought the burning branch down hard, catching the wolf across the snout with a crack that sent sparks flying. The wolf yelped and jumped back, shaking its head, but the smoke-colored leader used a distraction to lunge forward. Finn barely got the torch up in time, thrusting it straight into the wolf's face. The animal twisted away, but not before Finn smelled burning fur, heard the snarl of rage and pain. Behind him, Nalin screamed, a raw sound that cut through the night like a blade. The baby was coming now, whether Finn could protect them or not, whether the wolves broke through or not. Time had run out. The third wolf, smaller than the others but quicker, tried to slip past Finn's left side, going for the gap between his body and the cave wall. Finn kicked out hard, his boot connecting with the wolf's ribs with a solid thump that knocked the animal sideways into the snow. But the impact made him lose his balance, made him stagger, and the smoke-colored leader saw the opening. The big wolf rushed in, closing the distance in 2 powerful bounds. Finn swung the torch, but the leader ducked under it, jaws open wide, going for Finn's throat. Finn threw up his left arm instinctively, felt teeth sink into his forearm through the layers of coat and shirt, felt the crushing pressure as the wolf's jaws clamped down. Pain exploded white-hot through his arm, but Finn didn't let go of the torch. Instead, he brought it down hard on the wolf's back. Once, twice, 3 times, driving the burning end into fur and flesh. The wolf released him with a howl of agony and rage, backing away, smoke rising from a burned patch on its shoulder. Finn stumbled backward into the cave entrance, his left arm hanging useless and bleeding, his right hand still gripping the torch. The 3 wolves regrouped, circling just beyond the firelight, their eyes calculating, reassessing. They were hurt now, burned and bruised, but they were still hungry, still desperate. Finn grabbed another branch from the fire with his injured arm, biting back a scream as pain lanced through him. Now he had 2 torches, one in each hand, a wall of flame between him and the wolves.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Blood ran down his left arm, dripping onto the snow. and he could feel the warmth of it soaking through his sleeve. The bites were deep, probably to the bone, but he couldn't think about that now. Couldn't afford to think about anything except keeping the wolves back for just a little longer. Behind him, Nalin was panting rapidly, her breathing changing, becoming more focused. She said something in Apache, her voice strained but determined, and Finn didn't need to understand the words to know what they meant. The baby was coming right now. Not in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Now, the wolves sensed it too, sensed the vulnerability, sensed that Finn's attention was divided. The smoke-colored leader gathered himself for another rush, his muscles bunching, his eyes locked on Finn's throat. But before he could move, something happened that changed everything. A sound split the night, high and piercing and utterly human. A baby's cry, thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive, filled the cave and spilled out into the darkness. It was the sound of new life entering a world that seemed designed to crush it. The sound of survival against impossible odds. The wolves froze. Their ears pricked forward, their heads tilting, confusion rippling through the pack. This wasn't the sound of wounded prey or easy meat. This was something different, something that triggered some deep instinct, even in predators. The smoke-colored leader took a step back, then another, his aggressive posture softening into something more uncertain. Finn didn't question it, didn't waste time wondering why. He thrust both torches forward, shouting at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with exhaustion and pain and desperate relief. The wolves broke, turning and loping away into the darkness, their forms dissolving into the snow and shadows like they'd never been there at all. The sound of their retreat, the crunch of their paws on frozen ground, faded into the howl of the wind. Finn stood there for a long moment, both torches still raised, his whole body trembling with adrenaline and shock and blood loss. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed to his knees, dropping the torches beside him. His left arm was on fire, throbbing with every heartbeat, and when he looked down he could see the torn fabric, the deep puncture wounds, the blood that looked black in the firelight. But the baby was crying. The baby was alive. And that meant Nalin was alive too. He forced himself to turn around, to crawl back into the cave where the firelight danced across the rock walls. Nalin was propped against her buffalo cloak, her face pale and slick with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. And in her arms, wrapped in a piece of her deerskin dress that she'd torn away, was a baby. Tiny and wrinkled and covered in blood and birth matter, but breathing, crying, alive. Nalin's eyes found Finn's, and for the first time since he'd found her, she smiled. It was a weak smile, exhausted and trembling, but it transformed her face, made her look younger, made her look like someone who'd just witnessed a miracle. She said something in Apache, her voice barely above a whisper, and held the baby closer to her chest. Finn nodded, not understanding the words, but understanding everything that mattered. He dragged himself closer, feeding more wood into the fire, building it up until the cave was almost warm, until the cold was pushed back to the entrance where it belonged. His arm screamed in protest with every movement, but he ignored it. There would be time to deal with that later. Right now, there were more important things. He pulled off his shirt, tearing it into strips with his teeth and his one good hand. The fabric was dirty and worn, but it was all he had. He wrapped the strips around his forearm, binding the wounds tight to stop the bleeding, tying the makeshift bandage with a knot he pulled tight with his teeth. The pain made his vision gray at the edges, but he breathed through it, forced himself to stay conscious. Nalin was watching him now, her dark eyes tracking his movements. She said something else, her tone different, softer, and reached out with one hand while keeping the baby secured with her other arm. She touched Finn's injured arm, her fingers gentle, and her expression shifted to something that looked like concern, like gratitude, like recognition. Finn met her eyes and saw himself reflected there, not as an invisible stray or a nameless orphan, but as someone who'd done something that mattered. Someone who'd fought wolves and won. Someone who'd helped bring new life into a world that seemed determined to extinguish it. The baby's cries had softened to small mewling sounds, exhausted from the effort of being born. Nalin adjusted the makeshift blanket, tucking it tighter, using her body heat to warm the infant. She looked at Finn again and spoke a single word, clear and deliberate, pointing first at the baby and then at him. "Dakota," she said. Finn didn't know what it meant, didn't know if it was a name or a thank you or something else entirely. But he nodded anyway, acknowledging whatever she was trying to tell him. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the three of them, an orphan boy, an Apache woman, and a newborn baby, all huddled together in a cave while the Montana winter raged outside. Finn knew they couldn't stay here forever. They had no food except the frozen rabbits in his sack, no real shelter beyond this shallow cave, no way to get help. But for now, for this moment, they were alive, all three of them. Against every odd, against nature and wolves and the killing. Cold, they'd survived. He added another log to the fire and settled back against the cave wall, keeping watch, his injured arm cradled against his chest. Nalin had closed her eyes, the baby tucked against her, both of them breathing in rhythm. The sound of the wind outside seemed less threatening now, less like the voice of death, and more like just wind, just weather, just another challenge to overcome. Finn's eyelids grew heavy. He fought against sleep, knowing that sleeping meant letting his guard down, meant risking another Wolf attack or the fire dying or the cold creeping in. But his body had other ideas, pushed beyond its limits by the day's events, by the blood. Lost by the adrenaline crash that left him hollow and shaking. Just before he drifted off, he heard something that made his eyes snap open. Voices, distant but distinct. Men's voices calling out in a language he didn't understand, Apache, and they were getting closer. Nalin heard them too. Her eyes opened, and she sat up straighter, wincing with the effort, and called out in response. Her voice was weak, but it carried, echoing off the rocks and trees. The distant voices answered, urgent now, and Finn could hear the sound of movement through the forest, the crunch of many feet on snow. He struggled to his feet, positioning himself between Nalin and the cave entrance, his right hand reaching for the knife in his boot. He didn't know what was coming, didn't know if these were friends or enemies, rescue or danger. All he knew was that he'd fought too hard, come too far, to let anything happen to Nalin and her baby now. The first figure emerged from the darkness, into the circle of firelight, and Finn's breath caught in his throat. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in buckskin and fur, his face marked with paint, his long black hair adorned with feathers. He carried a rifle in one hand and a knife in the other, and his eyes swept the scene with the practiced efficiency of a warrior assessing a battlefield. Behind him came others, 6 or 7 men, all armed, all dressed for winter travel, all moving with the same predatory grace. They stopped when they saw Finn standing there, bloody and defensive, his small knife raised against impossible odds. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Then Nalin called out, her voice stronger now, speaking rapidly in Apache. The lead warrior's eyes shifted to her, then to the baby in her arms, and his entire posture changed. The rifle lowered. His expression softened from threatening to something else, something Finn couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe. Or awe. The warrior turned back to Finn and studied him for a long moment, taking in the torn shirt wrapped around his arm, the blood, the defensive stance, the sheer exhausted determination written across every line of his body. Then, slowly and deliberately, the warrior lowered his weapons completely and placed his right hand over his heart. He spoke, his voice deep and resonant, words in Apache that Finn couldn't understand. But then he switched to heavily accented English, 3 words that carried the weight of everything that had happened. "You save her," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement. and something more. Finn lowered his knife, suddenly aware of how ridiculous he must look. A half-frozen boy with a 4-inch blade facing 7 armed warriors. He nodded once, not trusting his voice. The warrior said something to his companions, and 2 of them moved forward, not threatening but purposeful. One gently took the baby from Nalan's arms, while another wrapped her in a thick fur blanket they'd brought. Nalan protested weakly, but the warrior who'd spoken, clearly the leader, said something that made her relax, made her nod. Then the leader turned back to Finn. He gestured at Finn's injured arm, concern evident in his expression. Finn shook his head, tried to say he was fine, but the world suddenly tilted sideways. He'd lost more blood than he'd realized, had pushed his body further than it could go. The cave entrance swam in his vision, the faces around him blurring into shadows. The last thing Finn felt before darkness took him was strong hands catching him before he hit the ground. And the last thing he heard was Nalan's voice, speaking. Softly in Apache, and then in broken English. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for my son." When Finn woke, he didn't know where he was. The ceiling above him wasn't rock or sky but canvas, stretched taut and held up by wooden poles. The air was warm, almost hot, and smelled of smoke and herbs and something cooking. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain exploded through his left arm, sharp and vicious enough to make him gasp. "Easy," a voice said in English, and a hand pressed gently but firmly against his chest, pushing him back down. "You've lost much blood. You need rest." Finn turned his head and saw an old woman sitting beside him, her face lined with age, her gray hair braided with strips of colored cloth. She wore a deerskin dress similar to Nalan's, but more elaborate, decorated with intricate beadwork and small shells that clicked softly when she moved. Her eyes were sharp and knowing, studying Finn with an intensity that made him feel like she could see right through him. "Where?" Finn croaked, his throat dry as dust. The old woman held a cup to his lips, some kind of bitter tea that made him want to spit it out, but she kept the cup there until he swallowed. The liquid was warm and spread through his chest like fire. "You are in the winter camp of Chief Dakota," the old woman said. Her English was better than the warriors had been, only slightly accented. 3 days you have slept. 3 days. We have treated your wounds and prayed to the spirits that you would wake. 3 days. Finn tried to process that, tried to remember what had happened. The cave, the wolves, the baby, Nalan, the warriors appearing out of the darkness, the woman. Finn said urgently, trying again to sit up. "The baby. Are they alive?" The old woman said, and her severe expression softened to something that might have been a smile. "Both alive and well, thanks to you. Nalan speaks of nothing else. How the white boy fought wolves with his bare hands. How he brought her son into the world when death was circling." Finn fell back against whatever he was lying on, some kind of bedding made from furs and woven blankets, softer than anything he'd ever felt. Relief washed through him so completely that for a moment he thought he might cry, but he swallowed it down, forced himself to stay composed. The old woman seemed to see right through him anyway. She patted his good arm, her touch surprisingly gentle. "You did a brave thing, a good thing. Chief Dakota wishes to speak with you when you are strong enough. But first, you must heal. Your arm was badly damaged. The wolf's teeth went deep. Without proper care, you would have lost it. Maybe your life." Finn looked down at his left arm for the first time. It was wrapped in clean bandages, not torn shirt strips but actual cloth, and he could smell the herbs they'd packed into the wound, sharp and medicinal. The pain was still there, throbbing with every heartbeat, but it was different now, less like fire and more like a deep ache. "How bad?" he asked. The old woman tilted her head, considering. "You will keep the arm. You will heal. But there will be scars. Deep ones. And for a time, using it will be difficult. The wolves damaged muscles, tendons. These things take time to repair. Finn nodded, accepting this. Scars were just proof you'd survived something. And keeping his arm was better than he'd hoped for in those desperate moments in the cave. Over the next few days, as Finn slowly regained his strength, he began to understand where he was and what it meant. The winter camp was larger than he'd expected, 20 or 30 lodges arranged in a rough circle, smoke rising from their centers into the gray sky. People moved between them with purpose, women preparing food, men working on weapons or repairing gear, children playing games in the snow despite the cold. They stared at him when he finally emerged from the lodge where he'd been recovering. Stared at the white boy who walked among them. But it wasn't the hostile stares he was used to in Ember Ridge. These were curious stares. Assessing stares, and sometimes respectful ones. Word had spread about what he'd done. About the wolves and the baby, and the 3-day vigil in the cave. Nalin came to see him on the 4th day. She looked better, stronger, though still pale. She carried her baby wrapped in soft furs, and when she saw Finn, she smiled that same transforming smile from the cave. She spoke in Apache, then caught herself and switched to halting English. "You save us," she said, echoing the warrior's words from that first night. "You give life when death was certain. My husband, Chief Dakota, he wishes to honor you." "To thank you." Finn shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to gratitude, wasn't used to being thanked for anything. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. Nalin shook her head firmly. "No, not anyone. Most white men would have walked away. Would have left Apache woman to die. You did not. You fought. You bled. You gave." She unwrapped the baby slightly so Finn could see his face. Peaceful now in sleep, his tiny features perfect and unmarred by the violence of his birth. "My son," Nalin said softly. "Because of you, he breathes. Because of you, he will grow strong. We have named him Ashki, which means boy in our language. But his full name is Ashki Fien, boy of Finn. So he will always remember who gave him life." Finn felt something crack open in his chest. Something he'd kept sealed tight for years. This child, this Apache baby born in a cave during a blizzard, carried his name. Would carry it for his whole life. Would tell the story to his own children someday. Finn Holloway, who'd spent 15 years being invisible, being nobody, would be remembered. He reached out with his good hand and gently touched the baby's tiny fist. Ashki Finn's fingers curled around Finn's finger instinctively, gripping tight. And Finn felt tears sting his eyes for the first time since his mother died. "Thank you," he whispered. And he wasn't sure if he was thanking Nalin or the baby or whatever spirits had kept them all alive through that impossible night. That evening, as the sun set and painted the snow in shades of orange and pink, Chief Dakota finally came to see him. Chief Dakota was not what Finn expected. The stories told in Ember Ridge painted Apache leaders as savage warriors, men who lived only for blood and warfare, who showed no mercy and understood no diplomacy. But the man who entered the lodge where Finn had been recovering moved with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. His presence filling the space not with threat, but with unmistakable authority. He was perhaps 40 years old, tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders and arms corded with muscle earned through years of survival in unforgiving country. His face was strong and angular, marked with lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow, wisdom and war. His hair, black as a raven's wing, hung loose past his shoulders, adorned with a single eagle feather that marked his status. He wore buckskin leggings and a shirt decorated with intricate beadwork. And around his neck hung a necklace made from bear claws and turquoise stones that caught the firelight. 2 warriors followed him into the lodge, including the smoke-colored leader who'd found them in the cave. But Dakota waved them back with a gesture. This conversation, whatever it was, would be between just the 2 of them. The chief settled across the fire from Finn, moving with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his own body, in his own authority. For a long moment, he simply studied Finn with dark eyes that seemed to see everything, to measure and weigh and judge in ways Finn couldn't begin to understand. Then Dakota spoke, his English accented but clear, each word chosen with care. My wife tells me you saved her life. She tells me you fought wolves with fire and courage. She tells me you brought my son into this world when the spirits of death were circling. Is this true? Finn met the chief's gaze, refusing to look away even though every instinct told him to show deference, to make himself small. I found her in the forest. She needed help. I did what I could, what you could, Dakota repeated, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. My warriors tell me they found wolf tracks, 3 animals, and blood in the snow that was not all yours. They tell me you stood guard over my wife and newborn son for hours while she recovered, while he found his breath. They tell me your arm was torn nearly to the bone, yet you did not abandon them. Finn didn't know what to say to that. It was true, all of it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it sound more heroic than it had felt at the time. In the moment, there had been no choice, no decision to be brave or cowardly. There had only been the need to survive, to protect, to keep moving forward because stopping meant dying. Dakota leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more intense. Do you know what would have happened if you had not been there? My wife would have died in that forest. My son would have died before drawing his first breath. And I would have lost the 2 people who matter most in this world. Do you understand this? Yes, Finn said quietly. Then you understand that I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with simple gratitude. Dakota continued. Among my people, a life debt is sacred. It binds not just the individual but the family, the clan, the tribe. You have saved my family. That makes you family. Do you understand what this means? Finn shook his head slowly. He'd never had family, not really, not beyond the vague memories of his mother and the absence of his father. The concept of belonging to something larger than himself, of being connected to people beyond simple transactions of work and payment, was foreign territory. Dakota smiled. A genuine expression that transformed his severe features into something warmer. It means you are under my protection now. It means any enemy of yours becomes an enemy of mine. It means you will always have a place at my fire, food from my hunt, shelter from the storm. It means you are no longer alone, Finn Holloway. You are Apache now, if you choose to accept this. The words hit Finn, like a physical blow. Family, protection, belonging. Things he'd stopped believing existed for people like him. Things he'd taught himself not to want, because wanting them hurt too much when they were impossible. And now this man, this chief of a people who were supposed to be his enemies, was offering all of it freely, without condition. Simply because Finn had done what anyone with a shred of humanity should have done. I don't know what to say, Finn managed. His voice rough. Say nothing then, Dakota replied. Words are wind. Actions are what matter. You have already shown me who you are through your actions. Now I will show you who I am through mine. You will stay with us until your arm heals. You will eat at my fire. You will learn our ways. And when the spring comes, when the snows melt and the world opens again, you will decide if you wish to return to your town of white men or if you wish to remain with us. Either choice will be honored. Finn nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Something was shifting inside him, some fundamental understanding of his place in the world that had been fixed for so long it felt like breaking bones to change it. He'd spent 15 years being nobody, belonging nowhere. And now this man was offering him everything he'd stopped dreaming about. Dakota stood, and Finn struggled to his feet as well, his injured arm protesting. The chief placed his hand on Finn's shoulder, the grip firm and warm. Rest now, heal. Tomorrow, if you are strong enough, I will introduce you properly to the tribe. They will want to meet the white boy who fought wolves and won, who brought new life into the world during the dying time of winter. As the chief left the lodge, the old woman who'd been tending Finn, whose name he'd learned was Desba, returned with food. She set down a wooden bowl filled with some kind of stew, rich with meat and wild onions, and a piece of flatbread still warm from the fire. Finn ate slowly, savoring flavors he couldn't identify, feeling strength return to his body with each bite. "Chief Dakota is a good man," Desba said, watching him eat. "A fair leader. When he says you are family, he means it with his whole heart. There is no deception in him, no hidden purpose. This is rare, even among our people. You should understand what a gift he has offered you." "I'm trying to," Finn said between bites. "The world is changing," Desba continued, settling beside the fire with her own work, a piece of leather she was decorating with dyed porcupine quills. "The white men push further into our lands every season. They take the buffalo, cut down the forests, dig holes in the sacred mountains. Many of our people believe there can be no peace, that we must fight until every white man is driven away or every Apache is dead. But Dakota believes differently. He believes there must be a way for both peoples to exist, to honor the land together rather than fighting over it like dogs over a bone." She paused, her weathered fingers working the quills into intricate patterns. "What you did, saving Nalan and the baby, it proves his belief. It shows that not all white men are the same, that some can see beyond the color of skin to the human being beneath. This is important, more important than you may realize. You have become a symbol, Finn Holloway, whether you wish it or not." Finn set down his bowl, suddenly less hungry. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to." He stopped, realizing he didn't know how to finish that sentence. What did he want? To survive, yes, that was automatic. But beyond survival, what? To matter? To be seen? To belong? All of those things seemed too large, too impossible to speak aloud. Desba smiled, reading his uncertainty. "You want what all people want. To be valued. To have purpose. To know that your existence makes a difference in the world. These are not shameful desires, young one. They are what make us human." Over the following days, as Finn's arms slowly healed and his strength returned, he began to integrate into the daily life of the winter camp. It was nothing like Ember Ridge. There were no saloons or shops, no money changing hands, no sharp divisions between the wealthy and the desperate. Instead, there was a community that functioned through mutual support and shared responsibility, where everyone contributed according to their abilities and received according to their needs. The women taught him basic Apache phrases, laughing good-naturedly when he mangled the pronunciation. The children followed him around with open curiosity, touching his lighter skin and hair, asking questions in rapid Apache that he couldn't understand, but that Nalan would translate with patient amusement. The warriors included him in their activities when his arm allowed it, showing him how they tracked game through snow without leaving obvious signs, how they predicted weather by reading the sky and the behavior of animals, how they survived in country that killed white men who ventured into it unprepared. One warrior in particular took interest in Finn. His name was Keel, which meant sparrowhawk, and he was perhaps 20 years old. Lean and quick with a face marked by old scars from a childhood accident. He'd been the one who'd first spotted the cave where Finn had taken shelter, who'd led the search party that found them. He spoke some English, learned from traders, and seemed determined to improve it by practicing with Finn. "You fight good." "For white boy," Keel said one afternoon as they sat outside Finn's lodge, working on repairing snowshoes that had seen better days. His tone was teasing but not cruel, testing rather than mocking. "I fight desperate," Finn corrected. "There's a difference," Keel grinned, showing teeth. "Desperate fighting is best fighting. Man who fights because he must, because there is no other choice, he fights harder than man who fights for glory or revenge. You had no choice. You fought. You survived. This is good. He paused in his work, studying the rawhide he was weaving through the wooden frame. Many of our young warriors, they do not believe white men can be trusted. They have seen too much, lost too much. Villages burned. Women and children killed. Treaties broken before the ink dries. But you are different. This confuses them. Makes them question what they have been taught. Is that a problem? Finn asked. Keel shrugged. Problem? No. Challenge?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Yes, it is easy to hate all white men when all white men you meet are miners who poison the rivers or soldiers, who shoot first and ask no questions. It is harder to hate when one white man bleeds to save an Apache woman and her child. You make things complicated, Finn Holloway. But complicated is better than simple lies. The conversation stayed with Finn as the days passed, turning over in his mind like a stone worn smooth by water. He'd never thought of himself as representing anything beyond his own survival. In Ember Ridge, he'd been invisible, less than nothing, a stray that people tolerated when they noticed him at all. But here, among the Apache, his actions carried weight, meaning consequences that rippled out beyond just himself and Nalin and little Ashki Finn. 2 weeks after Finn had first woken in the camp, a delegation arrived from another band. 6 riders on horses, bundled against the cold. Led by a man whose bearing spoke of authority equal to Dakota's. They'd come seeking the chief's counsel on matters Finn didn't fully understand. Something about territory disputes and pressure from white settlements to the south. Dakota received them with formal hospitality, and that evening he held a council in the largest lodge, where the leaders could speak and debate. To Finn's surprise, Dakota invited him to attend. You should see how decisions are made among my people, the chief said. How we balance individual voices with the needs of the community. It is different from the white man's way, where those with gold make all the choices and those without gold have no say. The council lasted hours, voices rising and falling in passionate Apache that Finn couldn't follow. But Desba sat beside him, translating in whispers, helping him understand the flow of argument and counter-argument. The visiting leader, whose name was Needes, believed the Apache should strike back against the encroaching settlements, drive the white men out before they became too numerous to resist. Dakota argued for caution, for attempting negotiation, for finding ways to coexist that didn't require endless bloodshed on both sides. The white men will not stop coming, Needes said, his voice hard with conviction. They are like locusts, consuming everything in their path. If we do not fight now, while we still have strength, we will be swept away like dust in the wind. And if we fight, Dakota countered, we will lose. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Their numbers are too great, their weapons too powerful. For every white man we kill, 10 more will come seeking revenge. The path of war leads only to the extinction of our people. Then what do you propose? Needes demanded. That we surrender? That we give up our lands, our way of life, everything our ancestors fought to preserve? I propose that we find a third path, Dakota said quietly. Not surrender, not war, but coexistence. There are white men who can be reasoned with, who see us as human beings rather than obstacles. If we can build bridges with those men, create relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual destruction, perhaps our children can inherit a world where they do not have to choose between their heritage and their survival. The debate continued, circular and heated, with other voices joining in. Some agreed with Needes, arguing that the white man's greed knew no limits, that negotiation was weakness. Others supported Dakota, citing the devastating losses their people had already suffered. The children orphaned, the villages destroyed. Finn listened to it all, understanding for the first time the impossible position the Apache found themselves in. Caught between a way of life that was disappearing and a future that seemed designed to erase them. Finally, Needy's turned to Finn, his eyes sharp and assessing. He spoke in Apache, and Desba translated quickly. He asks if you are the white boy who saved Nalan. He wants to know why you did this. Finn felt every eye in the lodge turn toward him. His mouth went dry, his heart hammering. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, wasn't prepared for a room full of Apache leaders waiting for his answer. But Dakota nodded encouragingly, and Finn found his voice. She needed help, Finn said simply, speaking slowly so Desba could translate. I found her dying in the forest, and her baby was coming, and there was no one else. I didn't think about whether she was Apache or white or anything else. I just saw a person who would die if I did nothing. So I did something. Needy's listened to the translation, his expression unreadable. Then he asked another question, sharper this time. Desba's translation came quickly. He asks if you would have done the same if it had been an Apache warrior wounded in battle against white soldiers. The question was a trap, Finn realized. Answer yes, and he'd be claiming allegiance to the Apache over his own people. Answer no, and he'd reveal that his compassion had limits. That he'd saved Nalan only because she was helpless. Not because he truly saw all people as equal. But Finn had spent too many years surviving by telling the truth. By not pretending to be something he wasn't. Lies required too much energy to maintain, and he'd never had energy to spare. So he gave the only answer he could. I don't know, Finn said honestly. I've never been in that situation. But I'd like to think I'd see the wounded man as a person first. Someone's son or father or brother, before I saw him as an enemy. I'd like to think I'd at least try to help, even if it was dangerous, even if it was complicated. But I don't know for sure. I can only tell you what I did when the choice was in front of me, and I chose to help. Silence followed Desba's translation. Needy stared at Finn for a long moment, his face carved from stone. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but perhaps respect for the honesty, for the refusal to give easy answers to impossible questions. He spoke again, briefer this time, and Desba smiled as she translated. He says you are wiser than your years, white boy. He says perhaps Dakota is right, that not all white men are the same. He says he will think on what has been discussed here. The council ended soon after, the leaders sharing a meal and speaking more casually as the tension eased. Needy's approached Finn before leaving, studying him with those sharp eyes. He said something in Apache, then switched to broken English. You save life. This is good medicine. Maybe you bridge between worlds. Maybe you show new path, Needy said, then added with the hint of a smile. Or maybe you just lucky fool who does not know when to walk away. Time will tell. That night, lying in his lodge and listening to the wind howl outside, Finn thought about what Needy's had said. A bridge between worlds. A new path. It all seemed too large, too important for someone who'd spent his whole life just trying to survive until tomorrow. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the people who changed the world weren't the ones who set out to do it, but the ones who simply did what needed doing when the moment came. His arm throbbed. A constant reminder of the wolves in the cave and the choices he'd made. The scars would be permanent, Desba had confirmed. Deep ridges of scar tissue that would mark him for life, visible proof of that night. But maybe scars weren't just wounds that had healed. Maybe they were also stories written in flesh, reminders of moments when you'd been tested and hadn't broken. Finn flexed his fingers, working through the stiffness, feeling the pull of healing tissue. The arm would never be quite the same, would never have the same strength or flexibility. But it would work. It would heal. And that was enough. As sleep finally claimed him, Finn dreamed not of the past or the future, but of the present moment. Of Nalan's smile and little Ashky Finn's tiny hand gripping his finger. of Dakota's hand on his shoulder and Keel's teasing grin, of Desba's patient teaching and the children's curious questions, of belonging, finally, after 15 years of being alone. And somewhere in those dreams, he heard his mother's voice, faint but clear, saying words she'd told him long ago when he was small and the world seemed safe. "You have a good heart. Finn, don't ever let the world make you hard. Promise me," he'd promised then, though he'd been too young to understand what it meant. And he'd broken that promise 100 times over the years, had built walls around that heart to keep it from breaking again. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to remember who he'd been before the world had taught him to be invisible. In the morning, Finn woke to find Chief Dakota waiting outside his lodge. And the expression on the chief's face told him that everything was about to change again. The sun had barely cleared the mountain peaks when Finn emerged from his lodge to find Chief Dakota standing in the snow, his breath making white clouds in the frozen air. But the chief wasn't alone. Behind him stood 3 men Finn had never seen before, and they weren't Apache. They were white men, dressed in the heavy coats and fur hats of mountain trappers, their faces weathered by years of wilderness living. 2 of them carried rifles slung across their backs, and the third had a revolver holstered at his hip. Their eyes fixed on Finn with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. "These men have come from Ember Ridge," Dakota said, his voice carefully neutral. "They say they are looking for a boy who disappeared 3 weeks ago. A boy named Finn Holloway. They say the town is concerned for his safety." The way Dakota said it made clear he didn't believe that last part, and Finn didn't either. Ember Ridge had never been concerned for his safety before. The town had barely acknowledged his existence, except to tell him to stay out of sight. But now 3 armed men had traveled into Apache territory in the dead of winter to find him. And Finn's instincts, honed by years of surviving on the streets, screamed that something was wrong. The tallest of the 3 men stepped forward, a lean figure with a graying beard and eyes like chips of blue ice. Finn recognized him now, a trapper named Cutler who sometimes drank at the Frozen Nickel and had a reputation for violence when the whiskey hit him wrong. "That's him," Cutler said, pointing at Finn. "That's the Holloway boy. We've been searching for weeks. The whole town's been worried sick." It was such an obvious lie that Finn almost laughed, but the rifles the men carried kept his expression neutral. "Why would anyone in Ember Ridge care where I went?" Finn asked carefully. Cutler's expression hardened. "Don't play stupid, boy. You know what you did. You know what you stole before you ran off into the wilderness. We're here to bring you back to face justice." The accusation hung in the cold air like a knife blade. Finn's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. He hadn't stolen anything. He'd been checking Silas Cormac's trapline when he'd found Nalin, had simply never returned because the wolves and the storm and everything that followed had made it impossible. But someone was claiming he'd stolen something, which meant someone wanted him back in Ember Ridge badly enough to invent a crime. "What am I supposed to have stolen?" Finn asked, keeping his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. $300 in gold coin from the general store, the second man said. He was shorter and stockier than Cutler, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. "Broke in through the back window, took it from the strongbox. Storekeeper found it missing the same day you disappeared. Pretty convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" $300 was more money than Finn had seen in his entire life. The accusation was absurd, but that didn't matter. In Ember Ridge, an orphan boy with no family and no standing had no defense against the word of respectable men. If they said he'd stolen gold, then he'd stolen gold. And the punishment for that would be a rope around his neck. Dakota's expression had grown cold, his eyes moving between Finn and the 3 men with the assessment of someone reading a situation that didn't add up. "This boy has been with my people for 3 weeks. He saved my wife's life and delivered my son when death was certain. He is under my protection now. If you wish to make accusations against him, you will need to provide proof. Cutler's hand moved closer to his rifle, not quite touching it, but the threat implicit. With all due respect, Chief, this is white man's business. The boy is white. The crime was against a white establishment, and white law applies. We're authorized by the town council to bring him back for trial. Authorized, Dakota repeated, his voice dropping to something dangerous. By a council that has no authority in Apache territory. You are guests here, tolerated only because I choose to honor the peace between our peoples. But that tolerance has limits. This boy is family now. You will not take him without his consent. The tension ratcheted up instantly. The third man, who hadn't spoken yet, moved his hand to the revolver at his hip. Finn saw warriors emerging from lodges around the camp, drawn by the confrontation, hands moving to weapons. The situation was seconds away from turning into violence that would shatter whatever fragile peace existed between the Apache and the white settlements. I'll go with them, Finn said quickly, before anyone could draw a weapon. Every eye turned to him, Dakota's expression shifting to something like betrayal. But Finn had learned long ago that sometimes survival meant accepting the lesser of two evils. And a trial in Ember Ridge, no matter how rigged, was better than a bloodbath here. Finn, no, Dakota started, but Finn shook his head. If I don't go, people will die. Your people, maybe these men, maybe both. And it will be my fault because I was the excuse for the violence. I can't let that happen. I won't. Nalin had appeared from her lodge, Ashki Finn bundled in her arms, her face stricken. She said something urgent in Apache, but Dakota held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Finn's face. For a long moment, the chief studied him, reading something in Finn's expression that others might have missed. You believe you will not receive justice in this town, Dakota said quietly. It wasn't a question, no, Finn admitted. But if I stay here and you fight to protect me, the consequences will be worse. For everyone. Dakota's jaw tightened, muscles working beneath the skin. Then he turned to Cutler and the other two men, and when he spoke his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You will take him. But know this, if any harm comes to this boy, if he does not receive fair treatment under your law, there will be a reckoning. I will come to Ember Ridge myself and I will demand answers. And if those answers do not satisfy me, the peace between our peoples will end. Do you understand? Cutler looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to tell this Apache chief that his threats meant nothing. But something in Dakota's eyes, some promise of consequences that went beyond words, made him nod instead. He'll get a fair trial. You have my word. The word of a liar is worth nothing, Dakota said flatly. But it will have to suffice. Finn, gather your things. 20 minutes later, Finn was mounted on a horse behind Cutler, his few possessions wrapped in a bundle that Desba had pressed into his hands along with dried meat and flatbread for the journey. His arms still ached, the wounds not fully healed, but he could use it well enough. Nalin had wept openly, pressing her hand to his face and speaking words in Apache that he didn't need translated to understand. Keel had gripped his shoulder, his expression fierce with barely controlled anger. And Dakota had pulled him aside for a final word. You are making a mistake, the chief said quietly. These men mean you harm. I can see it in their eyes, smell it on their breath. They did not come to bring you to justice. They came to silence you. Silence me from what? Finn asked, genuinely confused. I'm nobody. What could I possibly know that would matter? Dakota shook his head. I do not know. But I trust my instincts, and they tell me this is a trap. Please stay here. Let me send warriors with you if you must go. Do not ride into darkness alone. But Finn couldn't accept that. Couldn't be responsible for escalating tensions that might explode into violence. So he'd thanked the chief, promised to return if he could, and climbed onto the horse behind Cutler. As they rode out of the camp, Finn looked back once to see the entire tribe watching. Dakota standing at the front with his arms crossed, his face carved from stone. The journey to Ember Ridge took 2 days of hard riding through snow and bitter cold. The 3 men barely spoke to Finn, and when they did it, was in short, clipped sentences that made clear he was cargo, not a companion. They camped the first night in a shallow cave, building a fire just large enough to keep from freezing. Finn tried to engage them in conversation, tried to understand what was really happening. But they ignored him or told him to shut his mouth. It was on the second day. As they descended into the valley where Ember Ridge sat like a scar on the landscape, that things became clearer. They stopped to water the horses at a half-frozen stream, and Finn overheard Cutler and the scarred man talking in voices they thought were too quiet to carry. "Boss said to make sure the boy doesn't talk to anyone except the judge," Cutler was saying. "Straight from pickup to the courthouse, no stops, no conversations. And if he tries to run, we're authorized to shoot him in the legs. Just make sure he can still talk when it matters. What's he supposed to say?" The scarred man asked. "Whatever boss tells him to say," Cutler replied. "The gold theft story is just to get him in custody. The real trial is about something else entirely. Something worth a hell of a lot more than $300. They moved away before Finn could hear more, but it was enough. This wasn't about stolen gold at all. Someone in Ember Ridge wanted him under their control for reasons he didn't understand. Wanted to put words in his mouth, wanted to use him for something. And whoever this boss was, they had enough power to invent crimes and send armed men into Apache territory. Finn's mind worked frantically as they rode the final miles into town. Who had that kind of power? The mine owners, certainly. The town council members. Maybe the sheriff, though Dawson had always seemed more interested in keeping the peace than playing political games. But why would any of them care about an orphan boy who'd been invisible his entire life? They arrived in Ember Ridge just as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered buildings in shades of orange and red that made everything look like it was on fire. People stopped to stare as the riders passed, whispers spreading like ripples on water. Finn saw faces he recognized, shopkeepers and miners and saloon girls, all of them watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that looked almost like pity. They didn't take him to the jail. Instead, they rode to a large building at the end of Main Street. A 2-story structure made of proper lumber instead of rough-cut logs, with glass windows and a painted sign that read, "Thornhill Mining Company, Administrative Offices." Finn's stomach dropped. Thornhill Mining was the largest operation in the territory, controlling more than half the silver claims in the mountains. And its owner, Silas Thornhill, was the most powerful man within 100 miles. Cutler dismounted and hauled Finn down from the horse with unnecessary roughness. "Inside," he growled, shoving Finn toward the door. "And keep your mouth shut unless you're spoken to." The interior of the building was warmer than anywhere Finn had been in Ember Ridge, heated by a large iron stove that glowed red in the corner. The floors were polished wood, not packed dirt. The walls were decorated with maps and surveying charts and framed certificates that proclaimed Silas Thornhill's various business accomplishments. A woman sat behind a desk near the entrance, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression suggesting she found the entire world distasteful. "Mr. Thornhill is waiting in his office," she said without looking up from her paperwork. "Second floor, end of the hall." They climbed a staircase that actually had a banister, something Finn had only seen in the fanciest buildings in town, places he'd never been allowed to enter. The hallway upstairs was lined with doors bearing nameplates: accounting, surveying, legal affairs. At the end, a door stood partially open, lamplight spilling out into the dimness. Cutler knocked once and pushed the door open without waiting for a response. The office beyond was large and richly appointed, with a massive desk made from dark wood, leather chairs, bookshelves lined with ledgers and legal volumes. Behind the desk sat a man Finn had seen before but never met. Silas Thornhill himself. He was perhaps 50 years old, with silver hair slicked back from a high forehead and a face that might have been handsome once but had hardened into something calculating and cold. He wore an expensive suit, the kind that came from back east, and gold rings on 3 of his fingers. His eyes pale gray and sharp as broken glass, fixed on Finn with an intensity that made the boy want to take a step back. "So this is the famous Finn Holloway," Thornhill said, his voice smooth and educated, completely unlike the rough speech of most men in Ember Ridge. "The boy who saved an Apache woman and her child. The boy who lived with savages for 3 weeks and came out calling them family. The boy who is about to make me a very rich man. I don't understand," Finn said, finding his voice despite the fear crawling through his chest. Thornhill smiled, but it was the smile of a predator that had cornered its prey. "Of course you don't. You're just a street rat who got lucky, who stumbled into something far bigger than your small life could comprehend. But let me enlighten you, boy. Let me explain exactly what you've done and why you're so valuable to me." He stood and walked to a map on the wall, a detailed survey of the territory showing property lines and mining claims. His finger traced a section of mountains northeast of Ember Ridge, the same mountains where Finn had found Nalin, where the Apache winter camp was located. "This land," Thornhill said, tapping the map, "is sitting on top of the richest silver deposit in the territory. My surveyors confirmed it 6 months ago. Enough ore to make the current mines look like children's piggy banks. Enough to make whoever controls it wealthier than God. There's just one problem." He turned back to Finn, his smile widening. "The land belongs to the Apache. Treaty land, signed and sealed by the territorial governor himself. Which means I can't mine it, can't even prospect on it, without their permission. Permission they have repeatedly refused to grant." Understanding began to dawn, cold and terrible. "You want me to convince them to let you mine there?" Finn said slowly. "Convince?" Thornhill laughed, the sound like ice cracking. "No, boy. I want you to testify. You see, I've been working with some friends in the territorial government, men who understand that progress sometimes requires breaking a few outdated treaties. We've been building a case that the Apache have been harboring criminals, that they've been attacking white settlers, that they're a danger to the peaceful development of this territory. And then you appear, a white boy who lived with them for weeks, who they took in and protected." Thornhill leaned forward, his eyes glittering with triumph. "You're going to testify that they kidnapped you, that they forced you to stay in their camp against your will, that you witnessed them planning attacks on white settlements, that Chief Dakota himself threatened to kill you if you tried to escape. Your testimony will be enough to void the treaty, to authorize military action, to remove the Apache from that land permanently." "No," Finn said, the word coming out stronger than he felt. "I won't do it. They saved my life. They treated me better than anyone in this town ever did. I won't lie about them." Thornhill's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You will do it, boy. Because if you don't, I'll have you hanged for that gold theft. I'll produce witnesses who saw you breaking into the store. I'll produce the stolen gold itself, planted wherever I choose to plant it. And before you die, I'll make sure everyone knows that you were working with the Apache, that you were their spy in Ember Ridge, feeding them information about mining operations and supply shipments. I'll turn you into a traitor in the eyes of everyone who might have cared whether you lived or died." "Nobody in this town cares if I live or die," Finn shot back. "You said it yourself, I'm just a street rat. Why would anyone believe I was important enough to be a spy?" "Because I'll make them believe it," Thornhill said softly. "I own this town, boy. The sheriff, the judge, the newspaper editor, the mine foreman, all of them dance when I pull the strings. I can make you into whatever story serves my purposes. The only question is whether that story ends with you as a cooperative witness who helped bring dangerous savages to justice, or as a hanged traitor who got what he deserved. Finn's hands clenched into fists, his injured arm throbbing with the tension. He looked at Cutler and the other two men, saw them watching with expressions that said they'd heard all this before, that they were just tools in Thornhill's hands like everyone else in this town. He thought about Dakota's warning, about the trap he'd ridden into willingly because he'd thought he could prevent bloodshed. When? Finn asked quietly, when what? When do you need my testimony? Thornhill's smile returned, satisfied and cruel. The territorial judge arrives in 3 days. He'll convene a special hearing on the Apache question, and you'll be the star witness. Until then, you'll be held in protective custody. Can't have you running back to your savage friends before you've fulfilled your purpose. He nodded to Cutler. Take him to the storage room in the basement. Make sure he's comfortable enough to keep his strength up, but make absolutely certain he doesn't leave. And Cutler? If he tries to escape, you have my permission to break his legs. He doesn't need to walk to testify, he just needs to talk. They dragged Finn from the office, down the stairs, and through a door that led to a basement carved from rock and earth. The storage room was exactly what it sounded like, a windowless space filled with crates and barrels and mining equipment. They shoved him inside, and Cutler produced a length of chain, wrapping it around Finn's ankle, and securing it to a support beam with a padlock. Nothing personal, kid, Cutler said without any real sympathy. Just business. You should have stayed invisible like you were before. Visible people get used, and you just became very useful to the wrong man. The door slammed shut, and Finn heard the sound of a bar being dropped into place on the outside. Then footsteps retreating, and silence broken only by the distant sound of the stove upstairs and the wind howling through gaps in the foundation. Finn sat in the darkness, his back against the cold stone wall, and tried to think. 3 days. He had 3 days to figure out how to escape, how to warn Dakota, how to stop Thornhill from using him as a weapon against the people who'd shown him more kindness in 3 weeks than Ember Ridge had in 15 years. 3 days to prove that he was more than a tool to be used by powerful men who saw people as nothing but means to their ends. His fingers found the bandages on his arm, felt the ridges of scar tissue beneath the cloth. The wolves had tried to kill him and failed. The cold had tried to kill him and failed. Ember Ridge itself had tried to kill him slowly through neglect and indifference and failed. He'd survived all of it through stubbornness and resourcefulness, and the simple refusal to give up. Finn Holloway had spent 15 years being invisible, being nobody, being nothing. But Dakota had called him family. Nalin had named her son after him. Keel had called him friend. They'd seen him, really seen him, in ways no one else ever had. And he would not, could not, betray that in the darkness of the basement, surrounded by the tools and equipment of the mining company that wanted to destroy everything the Apache had left. Finn began to plan. He had 3 days. 3 days to become visible in a way that mattered. To make choices that would echo beyond his own small life. 3 days to decide who Finn Holloway really was, and what he was willing to sacrifice to protect the people who taught him what family meant. The chain around his ankle was heavy and cold, but Finn's mind was already working, already searching for weaknesses, for opportunities, for the chance that would come if he was patient and clever and refused to give up hope. Because hope, he was learning, wasn't weakness. Hope was what kept you fighting when the odds were impossible, and the odds had always been impossible. That had never stopped him before. The first day passed in darkness, broken only by thin strips of light that leaked through gaps in the basement ceiling boards. Finn counted the hours by listening to the rhythms of the building above him. Footsteps crossing the floor at predictable intervals. Voices rising and falling in conversation he couldn't quite make out. The opening and closing of doors that marked the beginning end of the business day. Cutler brought him food twice, stale bread and watered-down soup that tasted like dishwater, along with a bucket for his needs and a warning that any attempt to call for help would result in a gag. That would stay in place until the hearing. Finn ate slowly, conserving his strength, and spent the hours examining every inch of his prison that the chain would allow him to reach. The storage room was maybe 15 feet square, with walls of rough-cut stone on 3 sides and wooden boards on the 4th, where the door was set. The ceiling was low, barely 6 feet high, made from thick planks that supported the floor above. Crates and barrels were stacked against the walls, some marked with mining company labels, others with no markings at all. The chain around his ankle was heavy iron, the kind used to secure equipment or animals, and the padlock that held it closed was solid and well made. But the beam they'd chained him to was old wood, part of the original foundation that had been here long before Thornhill's fancy office was built above it. Finn ran his fingers over the surface, feeling the texture, finding the places where age and moisture had softened the grain. It wasn't rotten, not exactly, but it wasn't as strong as new timber either. Given enough time and enough force, it might be possible to work the chain free. The problem was time. He had less than 3 days, and working on the beam would make noise that would bring Cutler or one of the other guards. And even if he got free of the chain, there was still the locked door and however many men were upstairs, and the entire town of Ember Ridge beyond that. Escape seemed impossible, which meant Finn needed to think differently, needed to find an angle that didn't rely on brute force or luck. On the second day, something changed. Finn heard raised voices upstairs, angry and urgent, though he couldn't make out the words. Then footsteps, heavy and rapid, descending the stairs. The bar was lifted, the door swung open, and Sheriff Dawson stood in the entrance with an expression that Finn had never seen on the lawman's face before. Uncertainty mixed with something that might have been shame. "You've got a visitor," Dawson said gruffly. 5 minutes, that's all Thornhill's allowing. "And I'll be standing right here the whole time, so don't try anything stupid." A figure stepped past the sheriff into the dim light of the storage room, and Finn's breath caught in his throat. It was Silas Cormac, the one-eyed trapper who'd hired Finn to check his trapline, who'd paid him in advance and never asked for the money back even when Finn had disappeared. The old Scotsman looked furious, his weathered face flushed red, his single eye blazing with an anger that seemed barely contained. "Lad," Silas said, his accent thicker than usual with emotion, "tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't steal from McReady's store." "I didn't," Finn said immediately. "I swear, Silas, I was checking your trapline when I found an Apache woman in labor. I saved her life, lived with her people for 3 weeks. I never stole anything. Thornhill made it up to get me here, to force me to testify against the Apache so he can take their land." Silas studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I thought as much. The story never sat right with me. You're many things, lad, but you're not a thief. I told Dawson as much, told the whole town as much, but Thornhill's got them all convinced. Or scared. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. He glanced at the sheriff, then back at Finn, lowering his voice. There's talk in town. Some folks don't like what Thornhill's doing, don't like him using a boy as a weapon against the Apache. But they're afraid to speak up, afraid of losing their jobs or their claims or whatever leverage Thornhill holds over them. This town's rotted from the inside, lad, and I'm ashamed I didn't see it sooner. Can you help me? Finn asked quietly. Can you get me out of here? Silas's expression turned pained. I'm just an old trapper, lad. I've got no power here, no influence. But I can tell you this. There's a man arriving tomorrow with the territorial judge. A lawyer from the capital, sent by someone who's interested in making sure the Apache treaties are honored. Word is he's been investigating Thornhill's dealings, looking for evidence of corruption. If you can hold out until the hearing, if you can tell the truth in front of the judge and this lawyer, maybe the truth will actually matter for once. "Time's up," Dawson said from the doorway, his voice flat. "You need to leave, Cormac." Silas gripped Finn's shoulder with surprising strength. "Hold fast, lad. The truth has a way of coming to light if you're brave enough to speak it. And you're one of the bravest people I've ever met, even if you don't know it yet." Then he was gone, and the door slammed shut again. And Finn was alone with a tiny spark of hope that felt dangerous to trust. A lawyer investigating Thornhill. Someone from the capital who cared about treaty rights. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had an hour ago. It meant that maybe, just maybe, telling the truth wouldn't be a death sentence. The third day arrived with the sound of activity above, people moving with purpose, preparing for the hearing that would decide the fate of the Apache land and Finn's own future. Cutler came down with breakfast, actual breakfast this time, eggs and bacon and coffee, which told Finn that Thornhill wanted him looking healthy and cooperative when he took the stand. The guard unchained him from the beam, but kept his hands bound in front of him. Then marched him upstairs to the building that was now crowded with people. The hearing was being held in what Thornhill called the conference room, a large space that had been converted into a makeshift courtroom. Chairs were arranged in rows facing a long table where 3 men sat, the territorial judge in the center, an older man with white hair and a face carved by years of making difficult decisions. To his left sat another man in an expensive suit, younger, with sharp eyes and a leather portfolio in front of him, the lawyer Silas had mentioned. To the judge's right sat a stenographer, ready to record every word spoken. The room was packed with spectators. Finn saw mine foremen and shopkeepers, town council members and random citizens who'd come to witness the spectacle. Near the front sat Thornhill himself, looking calm and confident, like a man who'd already won. And in the back, partially hidden by the crowd, Finn caught a glimpse of Silas Cormac, standing with arms crossed, his single eye fixed on Finn with an expression that said, "Remember what I told you." The judge banged a gavel, calling the room to order. His voice was deep and authoritative, cutting through the murmur of conversation. "This hearing is convened to examine testimony regarding the conduct of the Apache tribe currently occupying territory northeast of Ember Ridge, and to determine whether said conduct violates the terms of the territorial treaty signed in 1875. Mr. Thornhill, you may present your case." Thornhill stood, moving to the center of the room with the ease of someone who owned the space. "Your Honor, thank you for traveling here to address this urgent matter. What I present to you today is first-hand testimony from a young man who was taken captive by Chief Dakota's band and held against his will for 3 weeks. He gestured toward Finn. "This is Finn Holloway, a resident of Ember Ridge. He will testify to the barbaric treatment he received, the threats made against his life, and plans he overheard regarding future attacks on white settlements. His testimony will prove beyond doubt that the Apache cannot be trusted to honor their treaty obligations." The lawyer to the judge's left stirred, raising his hand. "Your Honor, if I may. My name is Robert Chandler, and I represent the Office of Indian Affairs in the territorial capital. I've been conducting an investigation into Mr. Thornhill's business practices and his relationship with certain Apache territories. I have evidence that suggests this hearing is not about safety or treaty violations, but about illegal acquisition of mineral rights. I request permission to cross-examine any witnesses and to present my own evidence." The judge nodded slowly. "Permission granted. This hearing will follow proper legal procedure. Now let's hear from the boy. Finn Holloway, please approach and state your full name for the record." Finn's heart hammered in his chest as he placed his hand on a Bible and swore to tell the truth. The whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Then he sat in the witness chair and faced a room full of people who would either save him or condemn him based on what came out of his mouth next. "Mr. Holloway," Thornhill began, his voice smooth and leading, "please tell the court how you came to be in the custody of Chief Dakota's band." Finn took a deep breath. This was it. The moment everything balanced on. He could lie, could say what Thornhill wanted him to say, could buy himself safety at the cost of destroying the people who'd shown him what family meant. Or he could tell the truth and risk everything. He thought about Dakota's hand on his shoulder, Nalan's smile. Little Ashki Finn's tiny fingers gripping his, Keel's friendship, Desba's wisdom. I wasn't in their custody, Finn said clearly. I was their guest. They saved my life. The room erupted in murmurs. Thornhill's expression flickered with anger before he smoothed it away. Mr. Holloway, perhaps you're confused. Let me rephrase. When the Apache found you in the wilderness, did they force you to accompany them to their camp? No, Finn said. I was injured from fighting off wolves while protecting Chief Dakota's wife during childbirth. I would have died from blood loss and exposure if his warriors hadn't found me and brought me to their camp for medical treatment. They nursed me back to health, fed me, treated me with more kindness than I've ever experienced in this town. Thornhill's jaw tightened. You're telling this court that you voluntarily stayed with a band of savages for 3 weeks? They're not savages, Finn shot back, his voice growing stronger. They're people. Good people. Better than most I've met in Ember Ridge. Chief Dakota offered me protection, made me part of his family. The only threats I've received have come from you and your men. The room exploded with noise, people shouting questions and accusations. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Order. Mr. Holloway, please continue your testimony. Tell us exactly what happened from the beginning. And Finn did. He told them about finding Nalan in the forest, about the labor and the wolves and the desperate fight to keep her and the baby alive. He told them about waking in the Apache camp, about Dakota's offer of family, about learning their ways and seeing their humanity. He told them about Cutler and the other men arriving with false accusations, about Thornhill's threats in the office, about the plan to use his testimony to void the treaty. These are lies. Thornhill shouted, finally losing his composure. Your Honor, this boy is clearly traumatized. The Apache have manipulated him, turned him against his own people, is it? Chandler said, standing for the first time. Because I have evidence that corroborates every word he said. Evidence of surveying crews working Apache land without permission. Evidence of bribes paid to territorial officials to overlook treaty violations. Evidence of a systematic plan to manufacture a conflict that would justify seizing Apache territory for its mineral wealth. He opened his portfolio and pulled out documents, spreading them across the table for the judge to examine. Survey maps showing Thornhill Mining Company claims overlapping treaty land. Letters discussing the silver deposits and the obstacles to accessing them. Financial records showing payments to officials who should have been impartial. Thornhill's face went pale. Those documents are fabricated. You can't prove. I can prove everything, Chandler interrupted. I've been investigating your operations for 6 months. Mr. Thornhill, I have witnesses, documents, testimony from your own employees. This hearing was supposed to be your grand play to steal Apache land. Instead, it's going to be the trial that brings down your entire corrupt empire. The judge studied the documents, his expression growing darker. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Holloway, I want to be absolutely clear about something. You understand that by telling the truth today, you've made a powerful enemy. Why didn't you just tell Mr. Thornhill what he wanted to hear? Finn met the judge's eyes steadily. Because the Apache showed me that being visible matters. That standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous, is what separates people from tools. I spent 15 years being invisible and disposable. The Apache saw me as a person worth saving, worth calling family. I won't betray that. Not for safety, not for money, not for anything. The silence that followed was profound. Then the judge nodded slowly. Bailiff, take Mr. Thornhill into custody, pending a full investigation. And someone get those chains off Mr. Holloway. This young man is not a criminal, he's a witness for the prosecution. Chaos erupted as guards moved to arrest Thornhill, who fought and shouted. Finn sat exhausted, feeling like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Chandler approached him, extending his hand. That took courage, son. Thanks to your testimony, the Apache treaty lands are secure. You did good today. Silas found him outside as the crowd dispersed. You stood up to the most powerful man in the territory and won. Your mother would have been proud. What do you do now? Finn looked up at the mountains, where somewhere beyond the peaks the Apache winter camp sat. I know where I belong, he said. 3 days later, Finn walked into the Apache winter camp carrying supplies he'd bought with money Chandler had paid him for his testimony. The camp erupted with joy when they saw him, children running to greet him, warriors calling out his name. And Dakota, standing at the center, pulled him into a fierce embrace. You came back, Dakota said simply. I came home, Finn replied, that night. As the tribe gathered around fires to hear the full story, Finn sat with little Ashky Finn on his lap. The baby's fingers wrapped around his scarred forearm. Nalan sat beside him, translating when needed. Keel sat on his other side, making jokes that had the warriors laughing. And as the fire crackled and the stars wheeled overhead, Finn understood something fundamental. He'd spent 15 years being nobody, surviving but not living. But survival had never been the point. Living was the point. Connecting was the point. Being seen and seeing others in return. The scars on his arm would never fade. Permanent reminders of the night he'd fought wolves and won. The night he'd helped bring new life into a world that seemed determined to extinguish it. But scars weren't weakness. They were proof that you'd been tested and hadn't broken. Finn Holloway had been born invisible, had survived through stubbornness and determination. But he wouldn't die invisible. He was Apache now, by choice and by deed. He was family, seen and valued and loved. And as he sat there with the baby who bore his name sleeping peacefully in his arms, Finn finally understood what his mother had meant all those years ago when she'd told him to keep his heart good. He'd kept that promise, even when he'd forgotten making it. And because he'd chosen compassion over convenience, courage over safety, truth over lies, everything had changed. For him, for the Apache, for the future, the fire burned bright against the darkness. And Finn Holloway, no longer invisible, no longer alone, smiled.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.